My name is Jenna Donovan. I am the wife of Kevin Donovan. That's pretty much how I'd probably be known at Camp Veritas, let's be honest. I'm also a youth minister at St. Rose in Newtown, Connecticut. And I'm coming at you live, not live, from my house. And because we're all at our houses, right? Because we're in quarantine. I love what Matt Breslin was talking about this morning when he said we're in between two different things, right? Our foot is in Good Friday, one foot is almost in Easter, and then there's this weird day in between called Holy Saturday, where every tabernacle is empty, we don't celebrate Mass, and we're waiting. And I can't help but think about Mary on this day. What was going through her mind? Where was she? What was she doing? It was the time of Passover. It was the time of the Sabbath. So she wouldn't have been doing a whole lot. She would have been doing what we were doing, which is sitting around waiting, in a sense. Because Passover for them and a Sabbath for them was literally, you can't lift a finger. You cannot walk anywhere to go do something. And so she would have been in a state of quiet and peace and restful submission to the Lord's will, just as she had lived every day of her life. But in a very powerful way, what was her thought? You know, she had to have felt every sorrow of Good Friday still so powerfully. This was the first day that Mary would have been bereft of the physical presence of Jesus too. And we can understand that, right? We can understand the feeling of not receiving Jesus physically. And yet, she's Mary. She is without sin. And she has things that are part of her that are just not a part of us because of her immaculate heart. And I can't help be drawn to her virtues and think about those in light of her own sorrow. Because just as she experienced and witnessed the death of Christ, she also hopes and trusts in the resurrection that she knows is coming. Unlike the apostles who are probably really afraid and feel really alone, Mary has a sureness of faith. In fact, she might have been there in the upper room, consoling the apostles, a pillar of faith and strength despite her own sorrow. When you think about Mary's virtues, I actually, with me and a couple friends, every week we choose a virtue to try and live. And at the beginning of the week, I'm always like, I got this. Like, I have been doing this for a year now. Like, you'd think that I've gotten really good at living the Marian virtues. And at the end of the week, I get through it like, I made it. Sort of. I feel like I totally failed this virtue again. And yet, every week we try again. And we start over. And I can't help but think about how Mary lived these virtues perfectly. Even more so on this day, on Holy Saturday. So what are her virtues? Ardent charity. I have my handy dandy cheat sheet right here. I look at it every day when I'm sitting there trying to remember how I'm supposed to be living out this virtue. So her first virtue is ardent charity. Let your love for God be the driving force behind every decision that you make. Mary waited with a pure heart, full of ardent charity. And so every decision that she made on Holy Saturday was one of looking outside of herself, living in the presence of God, and also being present to the people around her, most likely the apostles, especially John, who has now taken her into his own home. Profound humility. Know who you are before God, nothing more and nothing less. When I think about humility, half the time our world says that to be humble means that you should just disappear, right? Like, it's not, like you should not have a say, like you should be quiet, but that's not what it is. It is to know exactly where you stand in front of God. And I'm sure that if she's with those terrified apostles, she's the only one in the room who knows who she is in the presence of God, and that she knows that God has not abandoned her. Universal mortification. It is to seek to lay down your life and your will at every moment. Even in the midst of her own sorrow, she is laying down her life for the people around her and for her God. She is not giving up, even for a moment, even for a day when Jesus is not physically present with her. She is not giving up the opportunity to lay down her life and her will in service of the Lord. Constant mental prayer. To always be aware of God's presence. Just because Jesus wasn't with her doesn't mean she stopped having a conversation with him. And I think this gives us tremendous hope, especially in quarantine, to know that the Lord is present and to practice the virtue of constant mental prayer is exceedingly difficult for us. It was probably a lot easier for Mary, but she gives us this thing to strive for. And I always say that it's not about being perfect when it comes to these virtues, because trust me, I'm not. It's about not giving up. Blind obedience. Following God's will without counting the cost. She'd been doing that. I mean, think about it. She just walked with Jesus through all of the suffering and his death of Good Friday. She knows what it means to not count the cost of one sacrifice. And yet, she didn't give up on Holy Saturday. She didn't give up on all the people who still needed her. She was still very much present. Divine wisdom. To always beg for God's Spirit to guide you. It's easy right now to be like, well, I really don't need to continue my Lenten fast. I mean, I know we only have one day left. Guys, you can do it. But it's easy to be like, well, I'm already struggling so much. And yet, we should always seek to do God's will despite wherever we are and how hard it is. Because God's will for us gives us the strength and the hope, just like he gave Mary that day, to get through it. Surpassing purity, to have a clean heart unstained by sin. I know for the apostles, they are just really struggling probably. Think about Peter. He had just betrayed Jesus. He's supposed to be in charge. And of all of the apostles, they all ran away except John. And I'm sure that on some level, her sinless heart was such a comfort and a consolation and a balm to the hearts of all of the apostles around her. Angelic sweetness, radiating joy and peace to everyone you encounter. Can you radiate peace on Holy Saturday? Will you radiate peace tomorrow on Easter Sunday? Sometimes it's way easier to just say it's too hard to be joyful when things are hard. And yet it is in these moments, in the waiting, in just being stuck in the house with our parents and our siblings, it's in these moments that we are called to have joy. Lively faith, constantly seeking God's will and never settling for complacency. In the midst of Holy Saturday, in the midst of the sorrow of Good Friday and the joy of Easter Sunday, Mary wasn't complacent. She did not settle. She was still striving to draw close to our Lord. And I think that for us, this is a great meditation to know that even in our spiritual solitude and in the desolation that it is to not be able to go to Mass for Easter, knowing that that's happening tomorrow and having to make that the big sacrifice, let's be honest, that we are still called to draw close to the Lord and to ask him to be with us in the midst of our suffering. And finally, my favorite, heroic patience. I have children. I have 3 of them. And every time I pray this virtue for a week, I am so grateful when I get to the end of it because I'm like, I made it. And it's funny because it means to always trust that God is moving and to have more faith in his plans than our own. And I forget sometimes that I want to just get something done. I just want to get Holy Saturday over with. But Mary didn't live just waiting for Holy Saturday to end. She lived Holy Saturday. fully. And we're called to do that too. So just to review, ardent charity, profound humility, universal mortification, constant mental prayer, blind obedience, divine wisdom, surpassing purity, angelic sweetness, lively faith, and heroic patience. I challenge you. It does not matter if you are a girl or a boy, because Marian virtues are meant for everyone. I challenge you to choose one of these virtues and start a new, it's not a fast, but a new conviction of prayer. Mary is one of the most powerful intercessors. She is the most powerful intercessor outside of Jesus and God that we have. If you can trust that holding her hand and walking with her will bring you closer to Jesus, then trusting that living out one of these virtues every week, starting on Easter Sunday, it will change your life as it has changed mine. Mary is a beautiful woman to follow, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, because she knows how most perfectly to follow Jesus, especially on a day that doesn't seem to fit into all the others, into a quarantine that doesn't seem to fit into the way that our lives have always flowed. It's late. Mary wants to walk with you while you're waiting. Whether that waiting ends on Easter Sunday, or whether that waiting ends in 2 months, or however long this quarantine's going to last. She wants your joy to be complete in the Lord. She wants you to have heroic patience. She wants you to live out universal mortification and blind obedience to the will of God, because that is the only way that you will truly find happiness. Jesus is with you, regardless of whether he is in the tomb or not. Do not be afraid to follow after him, even in the waiting.